Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another session of Yoga Readers. I'm very happy with those of you joining us online in the live session. I have changed the timing for this session to allow for more people to join us from different regions from the world. We are now a global community, and I realize that for some of you, this could be early morning, for some of you, a nice afternoon, and then for others, evening or even nighttime. And we have to juggle in between time zones. So I completely changed the timing, and I hope that this way other people, maybe more people, can join the session and our discussion. This meeting is recorded. I will not record the session, the discussion part. And if any of you would like to edit something out because you shared something which was maybe too emotional, too personal, just let me know. There is time between the end of the session and when I send out the recording, and just feel free to be as you are. So for those of you joining us today for the first time, Yoga Readers is a global online community that comes together in order to read together, although apart, books about yoga. We started with Light on Life by B.K.S. Iyengar, and we are continuing with The Tree of Yoga by B.K.S. Iyengar. We read a chapter for 2 weeks. We communicate through WhatsApp, and we have a Facebook group and also now a newsletter that will be shortly sent out to all of you. The newsletter is a kind of more organized way to understand the reading schedule, the focus questions that I will give you for part 3, and any other resources that I'm sharing with you, like for part 2, I shared about the churning of the ocean of milk, so you can read about that more in the newsletter. If you don't know me, my name is Agi Wittich. I've been practicing yoga for 2 decades. I've been teaching Iyengar yoga in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm originally from Hungary, but living in Israel. And I'm also a scholar of yoga. I did my PhD in comparative religions, and I focused on Iyengar yoga and gender. So I hope that today I can share with you a bit from my knowledge, some insights, whether about Hindu philosophy or historical contextualization that I can offer. But I would like to remind you that this is a community, so your input is really priceless. Whatever you experienced as yoga practitioners is really, really important. And we are here in order to share thoughts and talk about yoga. We can all just read a book by ourselves and get caught in our interpretations, our understandings, or misunderstandings of whatever we are reading. But when we have a chance to really talk about these subjects and hear other opinions, that's where I call it the magic happens. That's where transformation happens. That's where a dialogue is created, and we are more open to learn about this vast subject of yoga. So in today's meeting, we will start by a brief summary of part 2 of the Tree of Yoga. We will continue by a close reading, which means that I will put on the screen, I will show you the bits that I prepared for today for us to reread, since I guess you already read part 2 of this book. And when we do the close reading, I invite you to open your microphone and just read out. You can do it from the screen or from your book. And then we stop after a segment and I add something. Then we will have a group discussion, and after that, a conclusion section, a bit of of a heads up of what to expect next. So before I start with the summary, I would like you to type a word in the chat, in our chat, that describes your yoga practice. One word that comes to mind. You can take a moment to think about it. Maybe it just jumps up. Oh, so Kusum said it's regular. And then Megan added it's inconsistent. Inconsistent. Elizabeth. Anyone else? Regular. Okay. I get the Iyengar vibes here. Yeah, and he does talk about this, doesn't he? A regular practice. So Ruth added peaceful. Yes. Gentle. Tamasic. Oh, okay. Yeah, tamasic, full of inertia. Okay, just feel free to share, and if you're not into that, that's also fine. I think I would call my practice restorative, even though I'm preparing for an assessment, but I feel that it really restores my, my mental strength now, gives me focus. Okay. So let me summarize the part that you read. So in part 2, Iyengar delves deeper into the various aspects of the yoga practice. And he explains how each component, from the physical postures to breath control to meditation, is connected, and how all these parts actually form a comprehensive system of self-transformation. And he begins, and that's where we will also begin, with exploring asana, so the postural practice. And he describes the postural practice not as just a physical practice or a physical exercise, but a form of moving meditation. So a meditation in action that requires awareness, effort, and reflection. And then he describes how alignment, so proper alignment in postures, creates a state of meditation in action, where the body, the breath, and the mind, they work in perfect harmony. And this concept of meditation in action actually challenges the common perception of meditation, as it is usually seen as a purely seated, still practice. And this term, meditation in action, invites us, the readers, the practitioners, to consider how we might bring meditative awareness into our physical yoga practice, which I guess we all do, since he explains this as self-reflection, as thoughts, as asking ourselves as we are practicing, is this aligned? Is the right side and the left side, is it similar? Is it different? And as practitioners, I believe we all do that. So we will read into that a bit more. And then he talks about pranayama, so breath control. And he presents pranayama as a crucial bridge between the physical and the spiritual aspects of yoga. It's not that I'm saying that asana is not spiritual, but pranayama takes us beyond, okay, towards the deeper layers or the other organs of other limbs of yoga. So he explains how conscious breathing can influence both the body and the mind, and how it prepares us, the practitioners, for a deeper state of meditation. And he describes the physiological and energetical effects of pranayama, and he gives a scientific backdrop to this ancient practice. I was asked in the other group, the Hebrew speaking group, about kumbhaka and how come in this part there is only a partial explanation of kumbhaka. And I'd like to remind us that this is not a technical book. This book came after Light on Pranayama. The techniques were already described in another book that was really dedicated to explain the breath control practices. And it came after Light on Yoga. So if you're reading through the asanas, the postures that are mentioned in Light on in Tree of Yoga, you might say, oh, this is partial. He's not talking about the other variations. No, he's not. These are just examples. It's really bits of the whole knowledge that was given either in Light on Yoga or Light on Pranayama, and therefore we cannot take Tree of Yoga out of context, and we cannot ignore the other books that were written before this one. So keep that in mind. Then he talks about the physiological and energetic effects of pranayama. And then he goes to pratyahara, the sense withdrawal. And he explains how that is the next step in our yogic journey, so going in. And he explains how pratyahara cultivate an inner focus and discrimination, which allows us, the practitioners, to observe our own mental processes more clearly. It's not that we are not doing it during asana or pranayama practice, but it's about going deeper. And he gives us practical examples about how pratyahara can be experienced in daily life. And he makes this kind of abstract concept more accessible to us, the readers. We won't go into pratyahara today. I actually gave a talk about pratyahara a few weeks ago, and I read about it in different books of Iyengar. But we don't have time to go into that deeply. If time permits, then when we have time for questions, please ask me about pratyahara. I will be very happy to talk about it. So then in part two, he goes more into let's say, the higher or deeper practices of dharana, which is concentration, and dhyana, which is meditation. And he describes them as a natural outcome of a dedicated practice of what came before that. So if you do the yama niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, then you just reach this concentration and meditation. It's not something that you have to do. So he emphasizes that these limbs, these parts, cannot be forced, but they emerge organically when our foundation has been properly laid. And he describes these as both inspiring and grounding. And he really encourages us to just persist in our practice and not to look for these higher states of consciousness. So let's begin with page 42. We begin with the interplay of effort and awareness in our practice. So I'm sharing the screen, and whoever wants to read out, please open your mic, so unmute yourself, and you can just read. I'll enlarge this. So please.
In any yoga practice, in any yoga pose, two things are required: sense of direction and center of gravity. Many of us do not think of the sense of direction, yet in each pose, both the sense of direction and the center of gravity need to be maintained. To maintain the center of gravity, the muscles all have to be aligned with each other. If there is an overstretch in certain muscles, the center of gravity also shifts. Perhaps through insensitivity, you are not aware that you are doing this. Insensitivity means that part of the body is dull, that it has no awareness, and this is the part where pain will develop. You may have the impression that there was no pain while you were performing the pose, but the pain comes later. How is it that you didn't feel any pain at the time? Take the example of a pain in the back at the top of the buttock bone when you have been performing a forward bend such as Paschimottanasana. If you have this problem, observe next time you perform the pose that one leg will be touching the floor and the other buttock slightly off the floor, and one sacroiliac muscle will be stretching on the outside while one on the other side, the inner part of the muscle, stretches. That is due to one muscle being sensitive and the other insensitive.
We continue here.
In your practice, you will find within your own body that one part is violent and the other part non-violent. On one side is deliberate violence because the cells are overworking. And on the so-called non-violent side, there is non-deliberate violence because there the cells are dying, like stillborn children. I give a touch to the part where the cells are stillborn so that there can be a little germination, so that the cells can have new life. I create life in those cells by this adjustment, which I make by touching my pupils. But this creative adjustment is seen by some people as violence, and I am described as a violent or aggressive teacher.
And we continue.
In the sections that follow, I shall give a little more detail of what is involved in performing an asana and show how within the one discipline of asana, all the 8 levels of yoga are involved, from nama and niyama through to samadhi. I deliberately pursue in depth the various levels involved in the performance of asana, because in the West, this practice is too often considered to be only physical. When we start working on the performance of asanas, we all begin by just scratching the surface of the pose. Our work on the pose is peripheral, and this is known as conative action. Then, when we are physically doing the pose, all of a sudden the skin, eyes, ears, nose, and tongue, all our organs of perception feel what is happening in the flesh. This is known as cognitive action. The skin recognizes the action of the flesh. The third stage, which I call communication or communion, is when the mind observes the contact of the cognition of the skin with the conative action of the flesh, and we arrive at mental action in the asana.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering which parts should I pick and which ones we will not read together, and it was a hard choice. So this description of asana, it's quite fascinating on one hand, and on the other hand, I was thinking if someone were to read this without ever practicing a posture, they would never know what he was talking about. Because yoga practice doesn't look like a violent action from the outside, does it? It looks very peaceful. It could be very passive at times. If you look at just a Paschimottanasana, you wouldn't think that this could be violent. And on the other hand, he describes these 3 parts of penetrating the posture. That's my word. But when you look at a posture from the outside, it's very hard to realize the different layers and different aspects of how to practice it. So it made me think that this book was absolutely written for practitioners of yoga, and he says so. And of course, it wasn't written. I'll remind you all that these are parts from talks that he gave to Western audiences, so to his practitioners in Europe. And And it just it just looked so funny to me that this book is really hard to read to someone who is not practicing and living these ideas. And then taking Paschimottanasana as a study case to how to practice the posture. What does it mean to do meditation in action? I really like this bit. So let's continue still with the asana. If someone else wants to read, this is it's the same page as before. Is it 47? Yes. So page 47.
I have a question.
Yes,
Is
please.
it an okay time to ask a
It's
question?
okay.
Okay. What does it mean, a cognition of the skin with the cognitive action of the flesh? I can't grasp this at all. And that's when we arrive at the mental act. I get mental action of asana, but this communication with the skin, I don't get. And the other piece in a lot of this is about the cells. I don't feel my cells. And he refers to when he makes an adjustment, he knows he's taking the dying cells. So is this metaphorically speaking, or is this something I'm not there yet at all?
So I have to tell you, I'm quite young, and I met Guruji only once. I wasn't born in the right generation, but what I hear from other teachers is that when he taught, these were the words that he used. He was talking about his skin cells. He was feeling his cells. And this is not my firsthand experience since I don't have it, but I did research Iyengar yoga and I did research Iyengar books. So this is not a metaphor at all. But what is kind of confusing for us is all the differentiation he makes, because we do know that there is a difference between the skin and the flesh, right? So we have the muscle and the skin action, and maybe you heard that in classes. The muscle needs to go one direction, and then the skin needs to go in a different direction. And for one not practicing yoga at all, this sounds very odd. How can you move the skin? But you can. There are the deeper muscles and there are the more superficial muscles. So going back to the sentence that you asked about, I also like what he said, communication or communion, which I like these games with words that he does. But he says, this is about the third stage, so the more deeper stage of practicing in asana, when the mind observes the contact of the cognition of the skin. So the skin is a sense organ. The cognition of the skin is what you feel. And then there is the cognitive action of the flesh. When you move, you know that you move your muscles. So there is the awareness of the skin, and then there is the movement of the flesh. And when you join the two together, so you turn, let's say, Adho Mukha Svanasana, you turn your upper arm, but then the skin on your hand goes the other way. But you feel on your skin that when you move your upper arm, the skin will move from the thumb towards your little finger. But then you consciously move it the other way around to get a better grounding. Let's say that's just an example. So to get into that detailed action, that's what he calls meditation in action. That's where you are conscious not only of the actions you are doing, but about how it feels, and then you can refine your action as well. Does that make sense, Maureen? Yeah, okay, good. So examples are really good. I hope this is what he meant. And then he says, and then we can arrive at the mental action in the asana. So it's about doing it and feeling it at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, so Megan says, this helped me understand the term flesh is the soft tissue under the skin, while skin is the outmost layer of the body. Skin is part of the flesh, but the two are not the same. Yeah. So I think you cannot move the skin without moving the muscles under the skin. I think these are, like, physiologically speaking, different layers of muscles. But I think when he describes these actions, it's more about how he experiences them. When he speaks about moving the inner part of the diaphragm. I don't even know if you have movement muscles there, but it's more about the experience of softening the diaphragm. But I might be wrong. I might be not with enough experience. Well, let's move on. So page 47 then. Can you see it when the mind?
When the mind has come into play, a new thought arises in us. We see with attention and remember the feeling of the action. We discriminate with the mind. The discriminative mind observes and analyzes the feeling of the front, the back, the inside, and the outside of the body. This stage is known as reflective action. Finally, when there is a total feeling in the action without any fluctuations in the stretch, then conative action, cognitive action, mental action, and reflective action all meet together to form a total awareness from the self to the skin, from the skin to the self. This is spiritual practice in yoga.
So we jump to the next page.
This is how the asanas have to be performed. It cannot come in a day and it cannot come in years. It is a lifelong process, provided that the practitioner has the yogic vitamins of faith, memory, courage, absorption, and uninterrupted awareness of attention. These are the 5 vitamins required for the practice of yoga. With these 5 vitamins, you can conquer the 5 sheaths of the body and become one with the universal self.
Thank you. What do you think of these vitamins?
Yeah,
Isn't that nice?
Nice metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah. So we need these components to have a good practice. And even if we don't understand, let's say, all the way, so really deeply what he means by these different layers of practice, I think it's something to look forward to. And he says, just practice, just do it. And you will feel how there is this, superficial part of just what to do, let's say a beginner's practice. And then as you evolve in your practice, you get more, he calls it sensitive. And with that sensitivity, you can discriminate better. You can know yourself better. You can move differently. Just like how a headstand looks impossible for beginners. And then as you manage to do your headstand, you say, oh, but without the wall in the center of the room, that's impossible. And as you get to that, you say, oh God, but 20 minutes, how can I do 20 minutes? And as you do 20 minutes, you say, oh, but that's just Shirshasana 1, and there are more variations, and then there is the drop back, and so much more to discover. So as you advance, you feel like there is more to discover. And he talks about different levels of practitioners as well. We'll get to that. I think it's in a different part, but it's fascinating. And I'm just saying, don't get discouraged if these descriptions of practice don't resonate with you, because it's something to look forward to deepen your practice. So now we continue reading about asanas. This is a subchapter called the branches. So going back to the metaphor of the tree, and we are going to page 54. Here it is.
The branches of the tree are the asanas. What is the right attitude and approach to the performance of an asana? You have to become completely and totally absorbed with devotion, dedication, and attention while performing the pose. There should be honesty in approach and honesty in presentation, When performing a pose, you have to find out whether your body has accepted the challenge of the mind or whether the mind has accepted the challenge of the body. Are you working from the body to get the factual feeling of the pose, or are you doing the pose because you've read in the books that it's going to give you such and such an effect? Are you caught in the web of what you've read, searching for the experience of somebody else's written word, or are you working to know with a fresh mind what type of new light is cast on the pose by your own experience while performing it?
Do we continue?
Like a well-cut diamond, the jewel of the body with its joints, bones, and so on should be cut to fit into the fine framework of the asana. The whole body is involved in this process, with the senses, mind, intelligence, consciousness, and self. One should not adjust the asana to fit into one's body structure, but mold the body to the requirement of an asana. Then asana will have the right physical, physiological, psychological, intellectual, and spiritual being. Patanjali says that when an asana is correctly performed, the dualities between body and mind and soul have to vanish. This is known as repose in the pose, reflection in action. When the asanas are performed in this way, the body cells, which have their own memories and intelligence, are kept healthy. When the health of the cells is maintained through the precise practice of asana, the physiological body
Pranamaya kosha.
Pranamaya kosha becomes healthy and the mind is brought closer to the soul. This is the effect of the asanas. They should be performed in such a way as to lead the mind from attachment to the body towards the light of the soul, so that the practitioner may dwell in the abode of the soul.
Thank you. So here he explains how to practice posture, so the correct attitude to it, and for us to understand the depth that it can carry us into. Don't get caught in the thought that this is just physical, but that it can really connect us to the deeper sheets of our being. Do you have any questions about this part or any thoughts? So these were the parts that I thought were crucial for us to read about asana. Megan asked in the chat, are these stages Iyengar's contributions, or is he restating Patanjali's contributions? Well, he does say, Patanjali, that the dualities dissolve. He does not say dualities between body and mind, because according to Samkhya Yoga, they are both considered to be the nature part of reality. And then there is a difference between mind and soul. If soul is the Purusha, then there is a duality there. But when Patanjali, the sutra says that dualities vanish, and the interpretation Vyasa explains that the dualities is between heat and cold, between lusting or wanting something and aversion. So these are the dualities that he mentions, and not the ones that Iyengar explains here. So that is his interpretation. And then Iyengar says this is known as repose in the pose. This is all him. This is not Patanjali in any way, but this is the way he understands Patanjali. So these are the dualities he believes that should be overcome, reflection in action. Yeah, so thank you for that question of clarification there. Good. So we move now into another important part of our practice, pranayama. And just see or pay attention to the fact that in this tree metaphor, the leaves are considered to be the part of pranayama, which is actually the breathing organ of a tree. I really like this part. So the tree actually breathes through the leaves. And here in the metaphor, the leaves are the pranayama, the breathing techniques. So we will read now from page 57 onward, and that will lead us into our discussion. So here, and we will jump through passages. So whoever wants to read, please open your microphone.
As the leaves aerate the tree and provide nourishment for its healthy growth, so pranayama feeds and aerates the cells, nerves, organs, intelligence, and consciousness of the human system. When we are performing an asana, we can only extend the body fully if we synchronize the breath with the movement. Prana is energy. Ayama is creation, distribution, and maintenance. Pranayama is the science of breath, which leads to the creation, distribution, and maintenance of vital energy. Any asana done on an inhalation will end in merely physical action, whereas an asana done on an exhalation is vital and organic and produces physiological action and cellular health. Doing the pose with retention is only muscular. That is the way of practicing which I would call physical as opposed to spiritual yoga.
Would you
See
like
that
to
in your daily practice, there is a progression and a transformation. If I were to do yoga today, just as I did it when I began in 1934, then my practice would be like a healthy tree which does not give any fruit, or a healthy woman who cannot bear children. I am not doing that type of yoga. I want my action to bear fruit. The true fruit of yoga is not a material achievement or performance. The yogi's interest is to keep the head and the heart clean through the harmony of breath, and this is achieved through the practice of pranayama. The fruit of your action will tell you whether you are on the right path or not.
Thank you. And then he goes on to explain about the churning of the ocean of milk, which I sent you in the newsletter. You should already have the newsletter in your inboxes, by the way. And there is the story of the churning of the ocean of milk, which is a well-known story coming from the Puranas. And the way he interprets it with relation to pranayama is fascinating. And you'll be interested to know that this story comes back again in part 4. So this story is worth knowing. And I've sent you material about it, and I'm thinking about writing a longer post having quotes from part 2 and part 4. So that we can see the whole picture. In part 4, he speaks more about more analogies. He goes more into philosophical terms, and all in the framework of this beautiful story. So we'll continue reading now about pranayama. So just leaving the story out because of our time. So whoever is willing, from philosophically speaking.
Philosophically speaking, inhalation is the movement of the self to come into contact with the periphery. The core of being moves with the breath and touches the inner layer of the skin, the extreme frontier of the body. This is the outward or evolutionary process of the soul. Exhalation is the return journey. It is the involutionary process, where the body, the cells, and the intelligence move inwards to reach their source, the Atma, or the core of the being. This evolutionary and involutionary process within each individual is pranayama. Thus, in each cycle of breath, we have 2 paths towards understanding the existence of God. They are known as pravriti marga, the path of creation, and nivriti marga, the path of renunciation. Pravriti Marga, the outward path of creation, is an inhalation, and Nivriti Marga, the inward path of renunciation, is an exhalation. On the basis of this philosophy, the yogis were trained to reach balance between these two states. Thus, abhyasa practice and vairagya, renunciation, are brought together in cohesion in the practice of kumbhaka, which is usually translated as retention. Kumbhaka is retention of the breath, intelligence, and self, where the lifted Lord, the core of the being, in the inhalation is held by the practitioner as long as he or she can maintain it. This is Atma Dhyana, meditation on the soul. One does not simply hold the breath by physical retention, but holds on to the very self, which was raised up and elated through the inhalation. The moment one lets the self sink, the retention of breath becomes merely physical and mechanical, and is not true kumbhaka at all. In inhalation, as I said before, the self comes to the surface, like Lord Vishnu, who, after descending to the bottom of the ocean, lifted up the mountain to churn the ocean again. To maintain the stability of the lifted self is true kumbhaka. It is a purely divine state of practice in which inhalation, puraka, retention, kumbhaka, and exhalation, rachaka, are all involved. In kumbhaka, the self becomes one with the body, and the body becomes one with the self. It is the divine union of body and mind in inhalation, exhalation, and retention.
Thank you. Okay. I hope this makes you want to read more and more and reread it again and again. I see that we don't have enough time. I wanted to touch on the gender point of view when he says that the fruit of a pregnant woman and so on, the pro-natalist view of Iyengar yoga. Maybe we'll get to that later. And just previous to these sections, he speaks about, he says, some teachers encourage kumbhaka. And then he explains why he's not encouraging kumbhaka. So again, in Light on Pranayama, there is a whole section about kumbhaka, kumbhaka after inhalation, kumbhaka after exhalation. But why is he saying, why is he talking about some teachers? Well, in ancient yogic texts, there is a whole discussion about whether yogis should practice breath retention or not. Some say that any other practices are unnecessary. You just need to hold your breath for as long as you can to reach samadhi, to reach the enlightenment. And others say, no, this is too dangerous and just avoid it completely. And what Iyengar speaks about is kumbhaka as something that happens to you. Yes, kumbhaka, a real kumbhaka just happens. You don't have to force it. And his analogies of what happens in inhalation and exhalation, of course, as dualities, is also very interesting. And what he says there about asana, and asana done only on inhalation is just physical, and on exhalation is more spiritual. I was actually observing this point for the last 2 weeks during my practice. And I was just exploring, what does it mean to exhale in a posture? What does it mean to inhale in a posture? And it was very, very interesting just to try that out, just to take one thing that he says, not to take it into pranayama practice. I mean, when I'm practicing pranayama, I don't think I cannot observe these deep philosophical ideas. I just concentrate on my breath and I go, quiet and peaceful. But during asana practice, yes, I can observe my breath and observe the mind and see what goes on there. And well, this is the time when I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'll just apologize for you for not reading the part on the bark, on the sap, and the flowers, and the fruits. But I will say that we will deal with these in the first part of the book. So we won't read these limbs of yoga, but we will get to them eventually in part 4. I prepared some discussion questions for you. I'll post them in the chat, but maybe there is something that you would like to share that I haven't thought about. So I'll read out the the discussion questions just before I stop the recording. So for those watching the recording, you can just reflect on these questions and maybe share your thoughts on our Facebook group. So the first question is, how does Iyengar's tree metaphor for yoga help you understand the practice? Or maybe can you think of another metaphor that describes your yoga journey? And question 2 is, how does Iyengar's description of pranayama compare to your understanding or experience of breath work? And question 3 is, share a moment from your practice this week that reminded you of something from the reading, which I already shared. So this is where I stop the recording. Okay, so thank you all for your questions in the discussion and for sharing. Our next reading is part 3. And part 3 is about yoga and health. And I'll send you out in the newsletter focus questions about this read. We have 2 weeks to read this part. And in the newsletter, I also sent you about the story of the churning of the ocean of milk and the reading schedule. And I'll send these also in our Facebook group and our WhatsApp group. And of course, you are welcome to share your thoughts and questions in our Facebook group. I'll keep sending you inspirational quotes from our reading and another bit of a term that is in part 3 that maybe can enrich our reading. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or you can write me the questions. If you have any requests for our next session, please let me know so I can guide our sessions according to your wishes. And I think this session was very good. We changed the timing and many of you came, so that makes me really happy. And thank you for all the encouragement that you are sending me in messages. So Jill is asking, where can she sign up to the newsletter? So when someone else signed up and they can't get it. So I'll just send you now. Now it's a new link. So I'll just send it here in the chat and I'll add it in the description of the recording. And don't worry, I'll send it to you in our WhatsApp and Facebook group as well. And if you did not get the newsletter, I'll send you the newsletter as well. Okay, so thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.